Just got to Champions, gonna play some 5-5 tonight. Lineup looks fun, so I'm excited. It's been a little while, so hopefully I run well. We'll see how it goes. In the first hand of the session, there's an under the gun open to $30, down at 6-5 of diamonds in the low jack. I think generally I should be 3-betting or folding this hand. The stacks are deep, and I think it's fine to call at some frequency. DT calls in the hijack, and then Kamikaze 3-bets $125 from the cutoff. Pretty small bet size. I think he's going to be pretty wide here. He's a very aggressive player. He definitely likes to squeeze. Tim calls in the straddle and Harrison calls under the gun. I think given the small 3-bet sizing, as well as these two other players putting in additional money, I have a pretty mandatory call here. I expect DT to call behind as well most of the time. So I make the call, and as expected, he makes the call as well. We go 5 ways to the flop, which is the king of clubs, 3 of clubs, 8 of clubs. Absolutely nothing going on for us, and it actually checks around. I don't think it defines anyone's range too much except for Kamikaze. I would expect him to be building a pot with any strong club that he has, as well as a made flush. He's also probably betting at least strong top pairs at a high frequency. The turn is the ace of clubs, and it once again checks around to Kamikaze, and this time he puts out a bet of $175. I expect him to be trying to seal this pot at very high frequency at the time when it checks around to him twice. I think it's very unlikely that he has a strong made hand, and after it folds around to me, I decide to raise to $550, expecting to just get a ton of folds. If DT does have a medium flush here, I don't think he can continue, and even if Kamikaze has a weaker flush, I think he's going to fold a high percentage of the time. But like I said, I don't expect him to have much here at all. Both players do quickly fold, and I pull in this first pot with some well-timed aggression. I open up king queen offsuit under the gun to $20, and in classic Houston fashion, the middle position, the cutoff, the small blind, and big blind players all call, and we go 5 ways to the flop. The flop is the jack of clubs, king of hearts, 3 of clubs, giving me a strong top pair with a strong backdoor flush and backdoor straight draw. This is a very connected board, and I think my hand's strong enough that I want to start building a pot. With the backdoors, especially the king of clubs, I can continue versus a raise. I c-bet for $50, and it folds around to chairman in the big blind, and he makes the call. I think he's going to be folding a lot of his 3x, but I would expect him to be continuing with a lot of his king x and jack x. Probably folding a decent amount of gut shots if he doesn't have a club, but I would expect him at the very least to continue with hands like ace queen and ace 10 that have the overcard as well. He's definitely continuing with queen 10 and all of his flush draws. Given the wet nature of the board, I would expect raises from his king jack combos as well as his pocket threes. We go heads up to the turn, which is the ace of spades, probably one of the worst cards in the entire deck, as queen 10 does get there and all of his ace high flush draws now have top pair. I also think it's a lot less likely that I get value from a lot of his weaker pairs. So when he checks, I decide to pot control and check back. The river brings a blank in the form of the 6 of spades. Chairman checks again, and I think I want to start going for a little bit of value. I would expect him to be betting with his stronger hands here, including the top pair combos. So I think it's very likely that he has a king x combo or a medium jack x combo. He's a size of $125, and he's not thrilled, but he does flick in the call. I show him the king queen, and he shows me the king 10, so he had 1 pip lower than me, and I'm glad I was able to get value on the river in this hand. I open up pocket nines to $40 under the gun. The button, big blind, and straddle all call, and we go 4 ways to the flop with the pot at $165. The flop is the jack of spades, 5 of clubs, 10 of clubs. Not exactly the flop I'm looking for, especially multi-way. Although I do have reasonable backdoors, I think this is a board that's going to hit my opponent's range pretty hard. I expect them to have a decent amount of broadways when they call pre-flop, especially when they're in the blinds. I expect more suited jack x and 10x combos. Thankfully it checks around, and I absolutely smash the turn as the 9 of diamonds peels off. The strength of my hand is incredibly disguised, and I definitely want to start building a pot here. Primarily I want to be using large sizes here. I don't block that much of the calling range, and there's a ton of straight draws in addition to the flush draw that was already on board. I laid out for $125. Tim makes the call on the button. When flops checked around and the blinds have both checked on the turn, he's going to have a somewhat wider range here, especially when he's in position. I expect him to be continuing with all of his stronger pairs, his jack x, his 10x, and all of his pairs plus straight draw. So stuff like 10-8 and pocket 8s. Probably doesn't have too many unpaired combos with queen x, but I expect him to continue with those as well. Chairman also makes the call. I expect him to have a somewhat wider range given the pre-flop action, but he should also be somewhat tighter as I've bet and Tim's called on the button. I think he's going to have a lot more of the jack x combos and some of the 10x combos that have a draw, as well as the unpaired queen x and 8x that I think will call once. I expect raises from the top of my opponent's range, hands like king queen and 8-7, but I'm not sure how often some of their 2-pair combos are going to be raising here. They are with the stronger 2-pair like jack 10 at the very least. We go 3 ways to the river with the pot at $540, and the river is the jack of diamonds, giving me a full house. Chairman checks to me, and I think I want to use an overbet sizing. There's a ton of draws that have missed, and I think it's very likely that one of my opponents has a jack x combo when 2 of them have gotten to the river. Although to be fair, a lot of those jack x combos are a little bit weaker. There's also a slight chance that my opponents do have that straight that didn't raise on the turn. I think I would be bluffing here with hands like ace queen and pocket 8s, as neither has a ton of showdown multi-way here. With a weaker set, my hand also doesn't block quite as much of the calling range. He's a large size of $700. Tim quickly folds. Chairman tanks for a little bit before finally folding. As he's folding, he shows me that he has the 10-9 offsuit. So I got extremely lucky, but kind of an unfortunate run out for me, as I'm sure he would be calling most rivers, but I still scoop this pot. Dockefelt and Harrison both limp, and Chairman opens up the button to $80. I looked at king 10 of hearts in the small blind, Generally, this is a hand that I'm just going to be 3-betting every time versus the button open. Ranges are going to be very wide, so I have a lot of fold equity. I'm ahead of a lot of the raising range. And in this specific scenario, I don't really want to be calling, as it's very likely that both limpers will call. Although there is a little bit more consideration to calling, as chairman has opened it quite a bit larger. But I do 3-bet to $330. It folds back around to chairman and he makes the call. I think he's going to be continuing here with most pocket pairs, a decent amount of suited connectors and suited ace-x, as well as a lot of broadways. We go heads up to the flop, and it's kind of a mediocre one, as the king of diamonds, 2 of clubs, ace of clubs is shown. It's a board I want to have some checks on. My specific hand doesn't gain much from betting. There's not as much denial as if I had a weaker pair. I'm definitely not getting better hands to fold. He has a lot of ace-x. There's some merit to getting value from some of his draws and possibly a weaker pair, but I don't know how often those weaker pairs are going to be calling when there's 2 overcards. I do decide to check this one, and he decides to check back. I think his check back range is often going to be weaker pairs than the king x combo that I have here. I do think he's going to be checking back some of the ace x, especially the weaker combos. I would expect bets from a lot of his Broadway and flush draws, but I think he'll be mixing check back with those. The turn makes the board a little bit grosser as the queen of clubs peels off. It doesn't often necessarily change my absolute hand strength, but it does make it much more likely that my opponent has picked up some equity if they have a jack x or 10x combo, or more likely a pocket pair that contains a club. Still think I have a decent amount of showdown, so I'm going to check it again and try to get to the river. Thankfully, he does check back. At this point, I expect a lot of his ace x, even some of his stronger ace x, to be checking back, as well as the majority of his pocket pairs, even if they contain a club. The river brings the 4th club, and I think it's kind of an interesting spot. I definitely still have showdown against some of his weaker pairs. I definitely think there is an argument for me betting here as a bluff and just trying to fold out some of his ace-x combos, as well as his weaker pocket pairs that have made a flush. I think my opponent would have bet most of their stronger flush draws on the turn. I think it's very unlikely that he does have a stronger flush here, but I try to realize my equity and I check, and he quickly checks back. I show king 10, and he actually has ace king, so he decided to slow play, and unfortunately for him, he had one of the worst runouts. I'd probably call a flop bet, but I don't think he's getting much else from me. Him opens to a 6x raise under the gun and middle position calls. I look down at a7 of spades in the hijack, and I happily call. Definitely hand I could be 3-betting here. I think Tim and the businessman have pretty wide ranges, but given their stack sizes and their positions, I think call makes a lot more sense. We go through ace to the flop, and I absolutely smash it on the 7 of clubs, 5 of clubs, ace of diamonds, giving me top 2 pair. Checks to me, and I do want to be building a pot versus these opponents. I think they're both going to be calling a little bit wide, and there's a ton of draws on this board, as well as a lot of weaker pairs that will call at least once. I continue for $125, and only Tim makes the call. I do think Tim's going to be playing some of his ace-x combos this way, although he might be check raising his strongest top pairs like ace king, ace queen, and I think all of his weaker pairs are going to call at least once. He's also going to have some flush draws that play this way, especially on the ace high board. He does have a weaker ace-x flush draw. I do think it makes a lot of sense to play this way. Although he does have a ton of equity, he's behind other top pair hands. We go heads up to the turn, which is the king of hearts. This really shouldn't interact with my opponent's range unless he has the king x of clubs. On these draw heavy boards where the turn doesn't really change the nut advantage, I want to be using massive sizes. He only has about $700 back, so I decide to go all in. He does make the call. I show him the 2 pair, and the river is the jack of hearts, and he shows 10-8 of clubs for the busted flush draw, and I pull in this $1,800 pot. Sam opens under the gun. I think he's going to have a very tight range here. It makes the call in early position, and it folds around to me on the button, and I look down at queen 10 of diamonds. Given my position and the additional money in the pot, I think I have a pretty easy call here. I definitely don't want to be 3-betting against Sam's range. The Duckafelt completes in the straddle, and we go 4 ways to the flop. The flop is the king of clubs, 6 of diamonds, king of spades, and Sam continues here for $40. Although Sam does have a tighter range here, especially when he's betting multi-way, I think he's going to be closer to range betting this board. He's going to have a lot of hands with backdoors that can pick up equity, as well as a ton of pocket pairs that get value from weaker pairs and deny equity from overcards. Tim folds, and I think I want to have some bluffs here. There's really no natural bluffs on these type of boards. My specific hand has very good backdoors. I also block a good portion of Sam's king x combos, and I think I can get him to fold almost all of his pocket pairs, even aces here. So I bump it up to $160. He does reluctantly fold, so I get this one through. I think it's important to find spots like this where you can use a lot of aggression to get fold equity and pull in these pots without showdown. We have started around to the nit game. Karmakaze, Harrison, and myself all have nit buttons. Karmakaze opens this one from early position. Tim, Harrison, and the businessman all make the call. I look down at queen 10 offsuit in the straddle, and I make the call. Go 5 ways to the flop, which is the 8 of hearts, queen of spades, jack of clubs, giving me top pair and a gut shot. It checks around to Harrison, and he leads out for $50. I don't think Karmakaze or Tim have a particularly strong hand here, and I think Harrison's often going to stab here with a very wide range, as he does have a nit button. But I don't think he necessarily connected with this board too strongly, especially when he's using a small sizing here. It feels like he's trying to steal or at least push people out of the pot most of the time. So I think he's going to be doing this with a lot of weaker pairs and gut shots, as well as most hands that have backdoors. The businessman makes the call in the small blind. The businessman is typically calling pretty wide. At this point in the session, he's lost a couple pots. I think that range has widened even more, so I really don't think he has a very strong hand either. Given all this information, I think my top pair is looking pretty strong here. I do have additional equity as well. I bump it up to $200. I am incentivized to raise, as I do have a nit button. And this one gets through as the entire field folds, and I get rid of my nit button. Tim opens this one to $100 over the $20 straddle. Chairman makes the call, and I look down at King Jack offsuit. Mostly going to be folding this hand, but I think both these players have pretty wide ranges, and I decide to squeeze to $350. Tim makes the call, which I think is going to be all pocket pairs, all broadways, and most suited connected hands, as well as suited ace-x. I think this incentivizes Chairman to call as well. He's going to be folding some of the offsuit combos, but I expect him to continue with all of his pairs, as well as a lot of suited connected hands. But he probably has less broadways than Tim. We go 3-ways to the flop, and I flop a monster in this 3-bet pot on the Jack of Hearts, King of Spades, Queen of Clubs. Picks to me, and I'm really hoping my opponent's caught a piece of this. I continue for $400. They should be continuing with all their 10x combos and Broadway pairs. They'll very likely be folding their weaker pairs and worse. Unfortunately, both of them do fold, and I pick up $720. Ethan opens this one from under the gun. He's going to have a very tight range, especially from this position. Will, Tim, and Chairman all make the call, and I look down at ace-5 of diamonds in the cutoff. One of my favorite hands to 3-bet, but this time I elect to call. Both the small blind and big blind call, and we go 7 ways to the flop, which is the 8 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, Jack of diamonds, giving me the nut flush draw. It checks to Will, and he bets $150. Will's obviously going to be a little bit tighter here with this many players to the flop, but I think he's going to be betting all of his Jack X combos, everything from ace Jack down to Jack 9. He's going to have some straight draws and some weaker flush draws than me, but he obviously has the stronger hands too, pocket 8s, pocket 7s. I think he's probably 3-betting pocket Jacks, but he has most of the 2-pair combos as well. He makes the call on the low Jack. Given how wet this board is, I expect him to be raising the top of his range, so I think he is somewhat capped here. It's often going to be Jack X, a pair plus a draw, or a flush draw. He might also call once with his pocket pairs, especially if they contain a diamond. Chairman folds, and I decide to raise to $550. Ace-5 of diamonds is definitely a hand that wants to mix raise here. I really don't block any of the folding range, and I have a ton of equity versus most hands. Call is perfectly fine as well, especially when I'm in position. This raise goes very poorly as Will decides to 3-bet to $1350. Tim folds, and I have a tough decision on my hands. I think shove makes sense in theory, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense here in practice. Will's going to have an extremely strong range when he 3-bets on the flop. His value range is going to consist of 2-pair sets and straights, none of which are folding on this flop. He's going to have some flush draws with a pair, and he's going to have some weaker flush draws that I dominate, but I don't think it justifies going all in here. But being in position, I decide to make the call here. It's obviously a significant portion of my stack, but Will and I are both incredibly deep. I'm getting direct odds to hit my flush in position, and I think I have very good implied odds versus the range I stated. We go heads up to the turn, which is the 8 of spades. Will decides to check this one, and I happily check back, just trying to realize my equity. Again, I really don't think I have too much fold equity here. The river comes the 4 of clubs, and this time Will decides to shove all in for his remaining $2,100. And I have a pretty simple fold here. We talked about the hand after the fact. I really don't think he has any reason to lie to me. He said he filled up on the turn, so he either had pocket 7s, Jack 8, or 8-7, and he was hoping that I'd catch up by the river. Thankfully, I didn't, but this was a massive blow to take late in the session. It's almost time to wrap up for the night. Ethan opens the hijack to $35. It folds around to Tim, who 3-bets it to $100. Tim should have a wide range, especially given the sizing. I looked down at King Queen offsuit in the straddle, and I decided to cold 4-bet to $275. I have very strong blockers, and even though Ethan's going to have a pretty strong range, I do think he's going to be folding the vast majority of his hands to a cold 4-bet, and I'm fine applying pressure to Tim's 3-betting range. If he does call, I get to play in position. Ethan does make the fold, and Tim continues. Tim's ranges are going to consist of mostly stronger pocket pairs and stronger broadways, but I do expect him to have some suited connectors and some suited ace-x. We go heads up to the flop, which is the 10 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, ace of clubs, giving me the gut shot and the backdoor nut flush draw. And Tim decides to take a pretty interesting line, and he donk bets for $250. The donk bet is going to heavily consist of top pair combos, and I'm not sure I want to turn my hand into a bluff against that range. I am in position, and I have a pretty strong hand to continue with. I obviously make the nuts on a jack, and I pick up equity on any club. And if he is donk betting with worse than top pair, my king and queen are alive. So I make the call, and we go to the turn, which is the 2 of hearts. This turn doesn't do much for me, and I think I have a pretty easy fold as Tim barrels for $550. I reluctantly lay my hand down, and he does show ace jack offsuit. He does have a very strong top pair combo. I don't think I was going to get this one to fold. Not quite the end of the session I was hoping for, but I pulled in a ton of small pots throughout the session, and I had a little bit of help from some of the bomb pots, and I still ended up profiting $14.25. So overall, very solid session. It was good to get out there and play some 5-5 with the guys. I had an absolute blast. I look forward to doing it again. As always, I appreciate everyone tuning in. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you guys in a few weeks. Thanks.